What if I told you the life you're living right now is already ending? Not slowly, not gently, but suddenly. Most people believe change arrives with warning signs, emails, announcements, conversations, gradual discomfort. But real transformation doesn't knock politely. It crashes through the door when you least expect it. And most people won't be ready, not because they are incapable, but because they are asleep. Before any storm touches the sky, the atmosphere changes, the air thickens, the birds go quiet, the pressure shifts in ways most people cannot explain but can deeply feel. In the same way, before any life altering event erupts, something moves in the unseen regions of the psyche. That movement is the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness in the moral sense. It is the part of you that has been denied expression, rejected for approval, silenced for acceptance, or buried for survival. It contains anger you were told was inappropriate, ambition you were told was selfish, sensitivity you were told was weakness, and power you were told was dangerous. And long before the storm of change arrives, the shadow begins to stir. Most people ignore it. They feel irritation rising more easily. They feel restlessness without reason. They feel a subtle dissatisfaction with the roles they once performed effortlessly. Instead of listening, they distract themselves. They blame circumstances. They seek comfort, but what they call inconvenience is actually preparation. The shadow precedes the storm because whatever you suppress does not disappear. It accumulates. Like pressure building beneath tectonic plates, unacknowledged aspects of yourself gather force in the unconscious. The more you push them down, the stronger they become. And when expression is denied for too long, eruption becomes inevitable. Consider how often people say it came out of nowhere: a sudden breakup, a sudden resignation, a sudden emotional breakdown, a sudden identity shift. But nothing truly comes out of nowhere. The storm was forming in the invisible layers long before it appeared in visible reality. When you avoid confrontation, your shadow collects the words you never spoke. When you avoid risk, it collects the potential you never pursued. When you avoid truth, it collects the authenticity you refuse to embody. And one day, that collection demands release. The shadow precedes the storm because transformation requires confrontation. Before life rearranges your outer world, it forces you to encounter the inner parts you have resisted. This is why the period before major change often feels emotionally unstable. You may feel unusually reactive. Old memories resurface. Dreams intensify. You project qualities onto others that secretly belong to you. Projection is one of the shadow's favorite disguises. The traits you criticize most harshly in others often mirror what you have not integrated within yourself. The arrogance that irritates you may reflect your own suppressed confidence. The selfishness that angers you may reveal your neglected boundaries. The boldness that intimidates you may expose your hidden desire to act fearlessly. The shadow speaks first in whispers, then in discomfort, then in conflict, and finally in crisis. The storm is simply the final stage of ignored whispers. Yet there is profound intelligence in this process. The storm is not punishment. It is correction. It is the psyche's attempt to restore balance between the life you are living and the life you are meant to embody. If you refuse voluntary growth, growth arrives involuntarily. Those who understand this dynamic do not fear the shadow. They study it. They ask difficult questions. Why am I triggered? Why am I restless? Why does this pattern keep repeating? Instead of blaming the world, they investigate themselves. And in doing so, they release pressure before it explodes. Because when the shadow is acknowledged, the storm softens. But when it is denied, the storm intensifies. The most dangerous illusion is believing you are entirely good, entirely rational, entirely self aware. That illusion fractures under stress. True psychological strength comes from recognizing your capacity for contradiction. You are capable of generosity and resentment, courage and fear, love and aggression, creation and distraction. To deny this complexity is to divide yourself. And the divided self cannot remain stable forever. The shadow precedes the storm because wholeness demands integration. What you exile internally will eventually confront you externally. The people who betray you may reflect trust you refuse to give yourself. The chaos you experience may mirror the disorder within. The sudden endings you face may reflect parts of yourself that have already ended but were never consciously acknowledged. When you begin to sit with your shadow without judgment, without dramatization, you reclaim the energy trapped within it. Suppressed anger becomes clarity. Suppressed ambition becomes direction. Suppressed vulnerability becomes depth. And as integration increases, storms become less destructive and more transformative. Because the real storm was never outside of you. It was the collision between the person you present to the world and the person waiting to be integrated within, and until those two become one. Most people imagine personal growth as a slow, steady climb, a staircase, one step at a time, a predictable progression from confusion to clarity, weakness to strength, immaturity to wisdom. But real psychological transformation does not move like a staircase. It moves like a fault line. For long periods, nothing seems to happen. You read, you reflect, you struggle quietly, you question your patterns. You feel stuck, you doubt whether you are changing at all. On the surface, your life looks the same, your routines continue, your relationships appear stable, your identity feels intact. But beneath the surface, something is shifting. Individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, is not gradual because the unconscious does not operate in straight lines. It accumulates tension. It gathers insight in fragments. It rearranges meaning silently. And then, without warning, it breaks through. A realization hits you that you can never unsee. A truth about your family dynamic becomes undeniable. A pattern in your relationships reveals itself with brutal clarity. A version of yourself dies in a single moment of awareness. From the outside, it looks sudden. From the inside, it feels irreversible. This is why so many people resist deep inner work, because individuation is not cosmetic improvement. It is structural transformation. It dismantles identities you spent years building. It challenges beliefs that once gave you security. It exposes motivations you thought were pure, but were shaped by fear, approval seeking, or unresolved wounds. Gradual change is comfortable. Individuation is disruptive. For months, sometimes years, you may feel restless without understanding why. Activities that once satisfied you begin to feel empty. Conversations feel shallow. Achievements lose their thrill. You assume you are ungrateful or dissatisfied. In truth, your psyche is outgrowing a former identity. Growth does not politely inform you that it is coming, it destabilizes what no longer fits. Individuation often accelerates during crisis. Loss, betrayal, failure, isolation, these moments compress time. They strip away distractions, and for 10 confrontation, you can avoid self examination during comfort, but not during collapse. When the structures that defined you fall apart, you are left face to face with yourself. And that encounter changes you quickly. One honest confrontation with your shadow can accomplish what years of surface level reflection cannot. One moment of radical responsibility can end decades of blame. One decision to stop performing for others can dismantle a lifetime of false identity. Because transformation is not about adding more to yourself, it is about removing what is not truly you. And removal feels abrupt. You may wake up one day and realize you can no longer tolerate disrespect you once accepted. You may recognize that your career was built around external validation rather than inner meaning. You may see that your kindness was often avoidance of conflict. These insights don't arrive in slow, gentle installments. They arrive as complete images. Individuation is not gradual because the psyche seeks wholeness, not convenience. Wholeness requires integration of opposites, strength and vulnerability, logic and emotion, independence and connection. When these opposites collide within you, the tension builds. And when integration finally occurs, it feels like a psychological breakthrough, sometimes exhilarating, sometimes terrifying. There is also grief in this process. You grieve former versions of yourself. You grieve illusions. You grieve the comfort of ignorance. When you see clearly, you cannot return to blindness. That is why many people unconsciously resist clarity. They sense that awareness will demand change. And they are right. Individuation rearranges your relationships. Some people will no longer recognize you. Some will feel threatened by your boundaries. Others will drift away because the version of you they were attached to no longer exists. This shift can happen quickly, almost shockingly so. One conversation can redefine a relationship. One boundary can expose imbalance. One act of authenticity can separate you from environments that once felt permanent. Because once you align internally, external misalignments become intolerable. The myth of gradual growth comforts the ego. It suggests you can evolve without disruption. But real psychological maturation is more like shedding skin. It happens in cycles. Pressure builds, restlessness increases, identity cracks. Then, in a moment of undeniable clarity, something falls away, and you are different. Not slightly adjusted, not mildly improved, but fundamentally altered in how you see yourself and the world. Individuation is not a smooth curve upward. It is a series of awakenings. Each awakening compresses time. Each awake inning restructures meaning. Each awakening demands courage. And once the shift occurs, there is no returning to who you were before the rupture began. Most people fear chaos because it feels like loss of control. It disrupts routines, shatters expectations, and exposes uncertainty. We are conditioned to equate stability with safety and disorder with danger. But psychologically and spiritually, chaos is not the enemy of order. It is its origin. Before anything reorganizes itself at a higher level, it must first disintegrate at a lower one. Look at nature. Forest fires appear destructive, yet they clear dead growth and allow new ecosystems to emerge. The caterpillar dissolves inside the cocoon before becoming a butterfly. Even the formation of stars begins with violent cosmic collapse. Creation is rarely neat. It is turbulent, unpredictable, and intense. The same principle operates within the human psyche. When your life enters chaos, it often signals that the structure you were living in has reached its limit. The beliefs, roles, habits, or relationships that once supported you can no longer contain your development. But instead of experiencing this as evolution, you experience it as breakdown. A relationship ends unexpectedly, a career path collapses, a crisis exposes your vulnerabilities. An identity you relied on begins to feel false. It feels like everything is falling apart. In reality, something deeper is trying to come together. Chaos strips away illusions. It removes the comfort of autopilot living. It forces confrontation with truths you postponed. In stable periods, you can avoid difficult questions. You can distract yourself. You can maintain appearances. But when chaos erupts, distraction loses its power. You are confronted with what remains when control is gone. That confrontation is terrifying because it reveals how fragile your constructed identity might be. Who are you without your title? Who are you without their approval? Who are you when the plan fails? Chaos asks questions that order never does. Yet within that questioning lies possibility. Psychologically, chaos represents the collapse of outdated internal structures. The ego prefers familiarity, even if that familiarity is limiting. But growth demands expansion, and expansion cannot occur inside tight boundaries. So the psyche destabilizes what has become rigid. When you resist this process, chaos feels punishing. When you engage it consciously, chaos becomes transformative. There is a critical moment during every chaotic period, the moment you decide whether you will cling to the ruins or search for meaning within the collapse. Clinging prolongs suffering, meaning reorganizes experience. Order born from chaos is not a return to what was. It is a higher arrangement. After you endure heartbreak and confront your patterns, you relate differently. After professional failure forces you to reassess your motivations, your ambitions become more authentic. After internal conflict exposes contradictions, Your identity becomes more integrated. But this reordering does not happen while you are trying to preserve the old structure. It happens when you accept that the old structure cannot continue. Chaos humbles you. It reveals limits. It exposes blind spots. It dissolves false confidence, yet it also awakens dormant capacities. Resilience emerges only when tested. Creativity often appears when routine collapses. Courage is discovered when certainty disappears. What feels like destruction is often reorganization in progress. The uncomfortable truth is that you cannot build a new internal order without first tolerating disorder. The mind wants immediate answers, immediate solutions, immediate clarity. But chaos is a transitional space. It is the psychological equivalent of construction dust, messy, loud, and disorienting. Many people try to escape it too quickly. They rush into new relationships to avoid loneliness. They accept new jobs without reflection to avoid uncertainty. They rebuild externally without restructuring internally. In doing so, they recreate the same fragile order that will eventually collapse again. True order emerges only when chaos has been fully experienced and integrated. Integration means asking, what did this disruption reveal about me? What illusions were exposed? What strengths surfaced? What patterns ended? When you extract insight from chaos, you convert pain into structure. Without that reflection, chaos remains random suffering. With reflection, it becomes initiation. You begin to see that the breakdown was not arbitrary, it was necessary. The version of you that existed before the disruption could not sustain the future you are meant to inhabit. Something had to fracture, and in that fracture, space was created. Space for new beliefs, space for authentic direction, space for a self less dependent on external stability. Order that emerges from chaos is stronger because it was forged through confrontation rather than comfort. It is flexible rather than rigid, conscious rather than automatic, chosen rather than inherited. When you understand this, fear of chaos softens. You may still feel pain, confusion, even grief, but beneath it you recognize movement. You recognize that dissolution precedes creation. You recognize that instability can be intelligent. Because chaos is not the opposite of order, it is the crucible through which a deeper, truer order is born. Most of what shapes your life does not announce itself. It does not speak in loud declarations or dramatic realizations. It does not demand attention with obvious signals. Instead, it moves quietly beneath your awareness, shaping your reactions, guiding your attractions, influencing your fears, and organizing your decisions long before you consciously understand why. The unconscious moves in silence. You may believe you are making rational choices, carefully evaluating your options, thinking logically about your future. But beneath that surface layer of thought, older patterns are operating. Memories you barely remember, emotional imprints from childhood, internalized expectations, unresolved conflicts. These hidden forces do not argue with you openly. They guide you subtly. You call it intuition. You call it a gut feeling. You call it coincidence. But often It is the unconscious expressing itself without words. Silence does not mean inactivity. In fact, the unconscious is constantly active. It processes far more information than your conscious mind ever could. It notices tone shifts, micro expressions, subtle inconsistencies. It registers emotional atmospheres. It compares present experiences with past wounds. It forms associations instantly and without permission. By the time you consciously decide something, much of the decision has already been prepared. This is why you sometimes react before you think, why certain people immediately irritate you without clear reason, why you feel drawn towards situations that later reveal familiar patterns. The unconscious recognizes what is unfinished within you and pulls you toward it, not to punish you, but to complete something unresolved. And it does all of this without speaking directly. The unconscious communicates through symbols, dreams, impulses, and emotional surges. A dream that lingers with strange intensity, a recurring fantasy, a persistent fear that logic cannot dissolve, a pattern of self-sabotage that repeats despite your best intentions. These are not random malfunctions. They are messages delivered in symbolic form. But because they are not logical sentences, most people dismiss them. We live in a world that values noise, constant information, constant commentary, constant distraction. Silence feels uncomfortable. So when the unconscious attempts to surface through subtle discomfort, we drown it out. We scroll, we work, we overanalyze, we rationalize, and the unconscious waits. It is patient. You may ignore a quiet dissatisfaction in your career for years. You may suppress subtle resentment in a relationship. You may overlook a gentle but persistent feeling that you are living someone else's expectations. The unconscious does not force immediate confrontation. It gathers energy when its signals are ignored long enough. Silence turns into symptoms. Anxiety that seems to appear from nowhere. Emotional numbness, unexpected anger, sudden exhaustion, a sense of meaninglessness. These are not weaknesses. They are accumulated silence demanding attention. The unconscious moves in silence because it respects your freedom. It offers signals, not commands. It suggests through discomfort rather than dictates through force. But if you continuously refuse to listen, the volume increases. What begins as subtle tension becomes inner conflict. What begins as a fleeting thought becomes a recurring obsession. What begins as a mild dissatisfaction becomes a crisis. People often say change happened suddenly. In truth, the unconscious had been preparing that change quietly for a long time. Long before you ended the relationship, something inside you had withdrawn. Long before you quit the job, your energy had already shifted. Long before you confronted someone, your resentment had been accumulating. The visible event is merely the final expression of an invisible process. When you learn to respect silence, you gain access to P, profound guidance, sitting alone without distraction, observing your emotional patterns without judgment, writing down your dreams, noticing what consistently triggers you. These practices create space for the unconscious to communicate more clearly. Clarity rarely arrives in noise. It surfaces in stillness, and when you begin to listen, you realize how intelligent this hidden layer truly is. It seeks balance, it seeks integration, it seeks wholeness. The parts of yourself you reject are not enemies. They are fragments asking to be acknowledged. The unconscious does not shout because it does not compete with your ego. It simply continues shaping your reality from below. It influences what you tolerate, what you desire, what you fear, what you believe you deserve. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. It only ensures that it will speak through circumstance instead of reflection. The more you resist self examination, the more life arranges experiences that mirror what you refuse to see internally. Patterns repeat until they are recognized. Emotions intensify until they are understood. All of this movement, all of this orchestration begins in silence, beneath your daily thoughts, beneath your social identity, beneath your carefully constructed persona. Something deeper is always at work, and it never stops shaping the direction of your life. Most people prepare for life by adjusting their surroundings. They update their resumes, they build savings, they network strategically, they gather information, they create plans with careful timelines and backup options. And while external preparation has its place, it is not what ultimately determines whether someone withstands sudden change. Real preparation is internal. You can have the perfect strategy and still collapse under pressure. You can accumulate resources and still panic when circumstances shift. You can control your environment and still feel powerless when uncertainty arrives, because what determines your response to disruption is not what you have, it is who you are. External preparation builds structure, internal preparation builds stability. And stability is what survives chaos. Internal preparation begins with self awareness. It requires an honest examination of your patterns, triggers, fears, and attachments. Without that awareness, you may believe you are ready for opportunity, but sabotage it the moment it demands confidence. You may believe you are ready for leadership, but crumble when criticized. You may believe you are ready for independence, but cling to familiarity when loneliness surfaces. The unprepared mind does not reveal itself during calm periods. It reveals itself during pressure. When everything is predictable, you can rely on routine. But when routine disappears, your internal foundation becomes visible. Do you default to blame or responsibility, to panic or presence, to avoidance or confrontation? Internal preparation means strengthening the parts of yourself that cannot be taken away by circumstance. Emotional regulation, clarity of values, resilience under stress, comfort with solitude. These are not built through external achievements. They are built through reflection, discomfort, and deliberate inner work. Many people confuse busyness with readiness. They fill their schedules with productivity, believing activity equals progress. But activity does not equal alignment. You can be constantly moving and still be deeply unprepared for transformation. Internal preparation requires slowing down enough to ask difficult questions. Why do I seek validation? What do I fear losing? Where am I compromising my truth for comfort? These inquiries may not produce immediate rewards, but they cultivate psychological strengths strengths that cannot be borrowed, strengths that cannot be purchased, strengths that cannot be faked. When change happens suddenly, and it often does, your titles and possessions offer limited protection. If your identity is entirely built on external roles, then when those roles shift, your sense of self collapses with them. But if your identity is grounded internally in values, principles, and self understanding, then external change becomes adjustment, not annihilation. Internal preparation also involves confronting the shadow, the parts of you that react impulsively, the insecurities you disguise as confidence, the wounds that still influence your decisions. Ignoring these elements does not eliminate them. It simply ensures they will surface at the worst possible time. Preparedness means integration. It means acknowledging your capacity for fear without being ruled by it. It means recognizing your need for connection without becoming dependent on it. It means developing competence while accepting vulnerability. True internal readiness is quiet. It does not boast. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself in moments of disruption. When others panic, you pause. When others avoid, you engage. When others crumble, you adapt. This is not because you predicted every outcome. It is because you prepared your character rather than your circumstances. Internal preparation is also about detachment, not indifference, but flexibility, the willingness to let go of what no longer aligns, the capacity to release expectations when reality shifts. Attachment to rigid outcomes creates fragility. Alignment with core values creates adaptability. You cannot control timing. You cannot control every variable. You cannot prevent every loss. But you can cultivate a mind that remains centered when variables change. Many people wait for crisis before develop. Upping these strengths, they assume they will rise when necessary. But under stress, you do not become someone new, you amplify who you already are. If you have practiced avoidance, you will avoid more intensely. If you have practiced resilience, you will rely on it naturally. Preparation is a daily internal discipline, not a last minute reaction. It is the quiet work of self examination. The uncomfortable conversations with yourself, the boundaries you establish before they are tested, the values you define before they are challenged. External preparation may secure opportunities. Internal preparation determines whether you can sustain them. Because when the unexpected arrives and everything external shifts without warning, what remains is not your plan. What remains is your level of consciousness.